Hey, nonprofit leaders, I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host of Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, the show for people running nonprofits who'd rather work smarter than harder with abundance, excellence, and courage. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to join our newsletter where every week you'll get actionable tips, inspiring resources, and updates on new episodes. You can grab it at inspirednonprofitleadership.com. And a big thank you to our sponsor, DonorBox, who has mastered the art and science of removing the friction from donation forms. And you know we love a good process at Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Okay, let's dive in. My guest for this episode is Crystal FitzSimons, who is the president of the Food Research and Action Center. She is recognized as a national thought leader on hunger in America and the role federal nutrition programs play in solving it. In her more than 20 years with the organization, most recently as the Director of Child Nutrition Programs and Policy, FitzSimons has made transformative contributions, including helping to design and implement the after-school supper, summer EBT, and community eligibility programs. She has testified before Congress and led national coalitions. She is a sought-after speaker and is also regularly quoted in major media outlets. She holds an MSW from Washington University in St. Louis and a BA from Carroll College. Welcome, Crystal. It's such a pleasure to have you here. You have such an impressive background, but would you share a little bit about yourself personally to round yourself out as a whole person before we dive into nonprofit and hunger-related things?
Absolutely. Well, it's really wonderful to be here with you today. I would say, personally, the thing that I spend most of my time on when I'm not working is hanging out with my family. I have two kids, a daughter who's 21 and a son who's 14, and they just inspire me every day.
Oh, I love that. I have a son who's 13, so I'm there with you. He's like my biggest teacher in all things. Wonderful. Well, let's talk about your transition first, right? So moving internally, like what was that process? How was that decision made? And what have you learned in going through that?
Yeah, well, I would say that was a huge opportunity for professional growth for me. So, as you mentioned, I was at FRAC for about 24 years before I stepped into the president's role, and I had filled almost every role at FRAC. So, I started as a field organizer, then I was a senior policy analyst, then I was the director of child nutrition programs, and then I moved into the presidency role. And we went through a leadership transition. I became the interim president for a year. I like to joke that I had a job interview for almost a year because the board did take its time and really do a thoughtful search and ended up offering me the position, which was fabulous because, I find part of the reason people ask me why I stayed at FRAC so long, and I will say I stayed at FRAC so long because I love the mission and I love my colleagues and I'm just really passionate about the groups that I get to work for and the impact that FRAC really gets to have on hunger across the nation. But professionally, I found that my job kind of ebbed and flowed. Whenever I thought, maybe now's the time to think about a different career opportunity, something new would be handed to me that would challenge me and send me in different directions. And so when the leadership change happened a couple of years ago, I was kind of at that point where I'd been, leading the child nutrition team for a long time, really loved it, really loved my team, but definitely was excited about a new challenge and a new opportunity. And so when I was able to step into the interim role, I really just leaned in. And, I think it gives me this really incredible line of sight over the organization because I understand the different roles and the different challenges and, just with everything. I mean, FRAC is almost perfect, but maybe not 100% perfect. And so you're able to see and understand where people are coming from when they come to you with questions and concerns too.
Yeah. I think, there's two things that really interest me about this, your transition and the longevity. I think, it is still I was on another podcast interviewing someone else. We were talking about the high turnover in fundraising development staff and how that has been like the biggest problem in that area of nonprofits for decades, like 4 decades.
Yeah.
And I was reading another article, I can't remember where, just yesterday, about just all across all sectors, staff turnover and like shorter and shorter time at an organization is a huge issue. So I'd love it. Like, what are the things like, so I'm hearing like that kept you there were, new opportunities and interesting challenges. But what are some of the other things that maybe have made it great to stay? And are you kind of like a unique unicorn? Or are there a lot of other folks who've stayed a long time?
So there are a number of people at FRAC who have stayed a long time. Our development director, who stepped into the role maybe 3 or 4 years ago, she was our, grants manager for, I want to say 7 or 8 years. So she's been at FRAC for more than a decade. And then our Chief Government Affairs Officer, we actually just celebrated her 40 years at FRAC at our annual conference, and we were able to completely surprise her with that. And so it was really nice to celebrate her. And some of the other positions, I mean, my chief of staff has been at FRAC for more than a decade as well. She had worked with me on the child nutrition team and then was actually promoted to the chief of staff before I stepped into the president's role. So people do stay at FRAC, and I do think that a lot of it is about the mission. A lot of it's about the community and the colleagues and the fact that we really can see impact on our work in a way that I'm not sure every organization can see. And I will say, as someone who's been at the organization for a long time, and I know there's a lot of conversation about, like, if you say that your organization is like a family, maybe people should run away from that because it might mean really dysfunctional things. But I will say, since I was at FRAC for so long, every good thing that's happened to me as an adult almost happened to me while I was at FRAC. And also all the challenges, like I lost both of my parents during the time that I was at FRAC. And the organization is just so supportive and just, really felt support and love and, encouraged to take time off when it was a difficult time, encouraged to take time off when I was on parental leave. Like, it really is a supportive environment. And I remember my boss my dad was really sick, and he was just like, Crystal, you're never going to remember what you're doing today at work, but you will remember if you're not at home right now. So very supportive and want people to be able to see both sides of, how important our work is and how we need to really lean into it. But then at the same time, we're all human beings. We all bring lots of things to work, and we want to be supportive so that people can do their best job. Like, if you're not supportive of people, they're not going to do great work.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm hearing the beginnings of a culture that really is not like we should burn out and do all this, just work harder and just push, 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 push. But a culture, like I heard you say, encouraged to take time
Yeah.
off. Now that you're president, how are you kind of holding up that tradition? What are the things that you think are the most important traditions or processes or systems? Yes, I'm a systems person, call it a system. Sometimes people like it better if you call it a tradition. But what are some of those practices that you're upholding? And what are you bringing new to the table to continue that supportive culture that's keeping staff members for such a long time?
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely encourage people to take leave. We definitely are very supportive when people go out on parental leave, and we do have a very generous approach to parental leave. And I will say we do it for moms and dads, prioritizing that and making sure that people get that. I would say FRAC has transitioned to almost a fully virtual office during the time that I've been at FRAC. Before the pandemic, everybody was in the office every single day. Then we were remote. Then we were encouraged to come in one day a week. People didn't want to come in. I actually did not think that was the fight that I wanted to have with people, and also actually value the extra 2 hours I get to work that I'm not commuting into work. Yeah. But we've done a lot of work to try and build, community within the virtual world. So most people are in DC, but we do have staff that are located in other parts of the country. And so it's a little bit harder to get them in for like the in-person things, but we definitely plan in-person pieces. And we try, I try to model a culture of, respect and appreciation and collaboration, which I think people do appreciate.
Yeah. I think, that's still a very relevant conversation, in person, virtual. I think it, kind of depends on what type of organization you are. And I have a client who's a humane society, like they need to be in person with those animals, right? But they still do, at the leadership level, there's, some opportunities to work from home. But I do have to say, I've been running a fully virtual business since long before the pandemic. Like I was using Zoom before most people knew what it was. And I'll never forget one of my team members. We'd been working together for 2 years when we finally met in person. And I thought it was going to be like, oh my God, we're actually meeting in person. It's going to be so different. It's going to be so effective. And we got together and I'm like, it's basically like, 90% the same as all this like communication we've had through Zoom, because we were like communicating effectively on Zoom, and we could see each other's faces and we were working together closely. And I was like, oh, remote, especially if we're using video, can be quite good. What are some of the ways you've brought people together in person?
Yeah, well, so we do an annual conference every year. So we usually try to tie on things during that. So that was back in May this year, I think. And then we also do like a fall meeting with our network. So we work with a network of state and local anti-hunger groups that come to the conference. We usually get about 1,000 people at that. And then at our hunger leaders meeting, it's a smaller group, but we usually bring the staff in for that. And then there's often meetings and opportunities to collaborate. And we're actually having an ice cream social in a couple of weeks at the office, which will not include the virtual folks, but, really thinking about how to bring people in. So we do have some space that people can use. And sometimes I do go into the office and others do too, to kind of use it as a launching pad for meetings and all the other things that people are doing in downtown DC. But yes, and I think I will say the child nutrition team at FRAC, and back when I was leading it, they got really great at organizing games as part of their networking pieces, which I think really helps, because it's hard to like have people come together and just talk for 30 minutes virtually. So those were fun, Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune and trivia and all those things. So and it's a pretty fun group of people at FRAC, I think, most people have a pretty good sense of humor too.
I love that. I love the games, right? It's more than just the intense work part. I always joke, like when people join a Zoom call like a minute late and they're like, I'm so sorry I'm late. If this were real life, like I wouldn't even have noticed you're late, right? Like we're not counting the seconds here. Like, let's be a little.
That's right.
I want to ask you about hiring, because I also know one of the keys to keeping a team member a long time is hiring the right team members to begin with.
Yeah.
So what have you seen that has worked, and what are you maybe bringing in, if you're adding anything to how that process goes?
Yeah, well, so I will say that I think hiring is the most important thing that we do at FRAC, because, and I don't know if Jordan mentioned this to you, but we actually are unionized at FRAC.
Oh, no. Okay.
And so that adds a whole nother dynamic. And I know that we've been unionized forever. Before I was a manager, I was actually a shop steward for years at FRAC. So, have negotiated the union contract for the union and negotiated for the management. And I will say the relationship between the union and management at FRAC is very strong. And I think a large part of it is because a lot of the directors at FRAC and the leadership at FRAC have served in the union, so they understand that perspective. But what I would, when we hire people, it's a really important decision. I mean, I think it's an important decision for any nonprofit. And so we do have a pretty comprehensive hiring process, and I make it a priority to meet with everybody before we make an offer, because I think it's really important. I've never told anyone that they couldn't hire the person that they wanted to hire, for sure. But I also think it sends a really strong message to the person that you're hiring. The president has time to meet with you. They want to be available to you. They want to get to know you, and they're accessible if something comes up. And, FRAC is a relatively flat organization. There's me, there's the leadership team, and then we have a lot of like senior people and, policy analysts and different people, but it's not it's a small organization with about 40 people. So it's not really hierarchical. And I think it leads to a more collaborative approach. And I think people who work in the space that in nonprofits generally, I would say, and then also in the anti-hunger, anti-poverty space, people are really passionate about the work that they do. And so making sure that the work that people do and linking it back to the impact that it has, I think really can help motivate the staff.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a few really great things that you just said I want to highlight for our listeners. One is a comprehensive hiring process. I know I teach a hiring process. There are multiple long interviews, and I often get the question like, are we really going to do all these interviews? Are we going to do it even with like our low-level staff? And we'll say yes, because every hiring decision, like you might be hiring somebody for like lower pay, lower responsibility, and they might be your next president, right? Like, or
Right.
you're,
That's right.
a couple, I don't want to say generations, but like we're generations along, right? And even the lowest level, like lowest paid employee at your organization is still like tens of thousands of dollars, right? Like you
Yeah.
get it wrong. I like to dollarify it for people, right? Like a hiring mistake is easily a $30,000 mistake, an $80,000 mistake. So yes, you're going to do 3 or more interviews perhaps, and that's worth your time. The other thing I want to highlight that you said is about you being involved with every hiring decision. I can't stress this enough. The importance so often, the CEO, executive director, president is kind of like the lead culture setter, values holder, guiding principles knower. And they're going to have sense about a new hire that is really important for them to weigh in. And in case that you said, you're a smaller organization, I just heard a quote from Barbara Corcoran. She's like the business person on Shark Tank. And she said for like her first company, she made every hire personally and up to 500 employees, right? So if you're
Wow.
thinking, "Oh, that's too many people, I can't do it." Yes, you can. Yes.
Right. Right.
So I love that, that you're involved that way. Plus, like you said, like it's the beginning of a relationship. So, if you end up hiring that person, you want to kind of set the tone for what the relationships are going to be in the dynamic, and having a good relationship with you as the, president is going to be key. So I love that you're doing that. And then, so I think that's probably good for those points. I want to talk about, though, connecting to the mission, because we know that surface level, right? People enjoy working at nonprofits because they're passionate about the mission. But you do hear people feeling like they're disconnected anyway. What are some of the things that help the team feel connected to the mission?
Yeah. Well, we are an advocacy organization. And so which means that we spend a lot of time analyzing policy and coming up with campaigns and strategies and engaging policymakers. And our mission is what guides how we analyze the policy, how we decide what position we're going to take. And, there isn't always, it's not always 100% clear. A lot of times there are strategy decisions that you have to make when you're, making a decision. Like, are we going to accept this offer? Are we not going to accept and support this offer? Are we going to keep pushing for more? How does this actually play out for the people who are served by the programs that we care about? Is this going to be the best? Like, so there is a lot of strategy that goes into thinking about, what you're working on, how you're working on it, what you're willing to compromise on, when you're willing to compromise, all of those things. But it really, our mission and our values really do drive those decisions. And, there might be disagreements among the leadership team about strategy for sure. And I think that's always good, because I think it's good to talk that through and hash it out. but there usually isn't a disagreement on whether or not we should do something or what our priority should be or what we're asking for, because that is really driven by our mission. And in order to be to be on the same page with that, we need to be on the same page with the mission, and people need to be incorporating it throughout their work.
Yeah, yeah, that's really powerful. And speaking of advocacy, it's not exactly like a time of nothing to do. How have you coped with, I don't know, do you feel, does it feel like a crisis? Does it feel like, oh, we got a lot of work to do? How does this current moment of needing to advocate, be an advocate feel like? And how are you responding?
Yeah, well, I feel like we're in a marathon and a sprint at the same time because, FRAC is a nonprofit, so we will work with any party on our priorities and our mission. But when Trump was elected, we had a taste of the things that he proposed in 2016, and a lot of them did not actually go through. He ran out of time. There was a court that overturned something. The pandemic hit, and so it kind of actually shifted so that there were a lot of really good things that kind of happened. We had a trial run of free school meals for all, for example, when Trump was president the first time. But we knew where they were going. And I mean, with Project 2025, we also knew some of the policies that they would be pushing on. And so, we were very focused. We were ready. A lot of the things that they are pushing on are things that they weren't successful last time around. So we kind of could go back to that playbook. But I mean, I knew it was going to be a really difficult time. I actually signed up with a friend to run a half marathon in the spring in 2025. And it was actually amazing because it forced me to get outside and clear my head. And even in the winter when it's really hard to get out to run for me anyway. Yes, no, I knew it was going to be tough because we had a sense of the policies that they had pushed on. We actually are just coming off of like a slight victory in that the Senate was trying to move a farm bill that only extended something for 1 year, but we really wanted 2 years, and the Democrats were pushing, and we were, our team was working really hard, and it just kind of fell apart. And they're going to come back in September, and we're going to be making the same arguments, and we're doing a week of action next week to really kind of elevate the importance of the supplemental nutrition assistance program and the role that it plays in combating hunger and improving health.
Yeah, it's so important. And I know the ripple effect. I know so many nonprofits who were implementing programs related to SNAP that got cut. I think a lot of, folks out there, maybe not so much in our listening community, but not everybody works, right? Like in hunger and food in some way, but like SNAP was more than just like those old food stamp benefits to like help people buy food. There was so much more going on, education programs, support programs, and many of those have been cut.
Yeah. And the SNAP nutrition education program, they zeroed it out last year in the budget reconciliation. And yeah, all of those programs, I mean, they were all over the country providing nutrition education, all of them, shut down without that funding. And, some of them were able to raise private dollars, but it definitely really had a huge impact on nutrition education. And that nutrition education specifically was targeted to low-income families, which I think was absolutely critical.
Yeah, really important. I actually was just unrelated to nonprofits, but listening to an audiobook on wealth building. And it really struck me as saying a reason to like want to be wealthy is wealthy people live longer because generally they have access to better nutrition and better nutrition like information. And so what a way to like close the gap a little, providing education. I'm sure that was a hard one to lose. Amongst it all, any bright spots or opportunities that you see?
Yeah, well, so I will say, so we just had that little bit of a victory last week, although we'll see what happens in September when Congress comes back. One of the places that I look to for inspiration right now when so many things are so dire is kind of our Healthy School Meals for All work. And that is when schools offer free meals to all their students at no charge. And it eliminates stigma for kids who are qualified for free meals. It helps kids who don't quite qualify for free meals, but families are really struggling. And it just really helps to ensure that all the kids coming into the classroom are well-nourished and ready to learn. And then so many families are just feeling this squeeze because grocery prices are so high. So if you're able to count on school breakfast and lunch to feed your kids, it really does alleviate some of that pressure. So we just released a report a couple weeks ago, the community eligibility report, and we found that more schools were offering free meals to all their students. And I think it was about 55,000 schools across the country who are doing it. North Dakota actually has a ballot initiative to offer free meals to all their students across the state, which would be amazing because we have 9 states who have passed statewide policies
I'm in New
far.
York. I think it's one of them. I'm pretty sure we're.
Yeah, you guys are one of them. And yeah, no, that effort was, we worked with the leaders on that. There were 2 amazing state groups who did that. New York Hunger Solutions and Community Food Advocates led that effort. And yes, it was amazing when New York came in. And North Dakota would be the first, rural red state who would come into it if they're able to get it through on the ballot initiative. So very excited about that prospect too.
Those are big wins. I know, like every parent or, person who's caregiving feels that, even if it's just that, like you said, a little less pressure, even just to not, to just not worry about lunch money and those things. Like, it is such a powerful, powerful impact to have just lunch, It's great. Before we wrap up, just kind of shifting back into nonprofit leadership thinking, what words of wisdom would you offer other nonprofit leaders out there? What are the, the number one things you'd say to keep the main thing? As I think it's Stephen Covey said, the main thing is keep the main thing, but like which main thing, right? What advice do you have for folks?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's funny when Trump won re-election, one of the things that I did immediately was like send an email out to our network about how, at this moment in time, and it is a really unprecedented moment in time. And I will say, sitting in the president's seat, probably my least favorite things to do are operations, and HR stuff. But leaning into the mission and really being very clear that that's why you're there. And we need to lean into our mission. We're going to get through this. This too shall pass, which is, the famous saying. And I think it's absolutely true because I've been at FRAC long enough to know that we know what works and that we can end food insecurity. We can end hunger in the United States. We just need the political will to do it. But I do think as leading an organization, there are so many pressures and your staff feels, I would say, well, just to speak for FRAC staff, but I think generally for most of the people who I know who work for nonprofits, people work in this space because they really care. And so to see some of the things that are happening right now is devastating to the staff. The things that are happening to immigrant families right now, FRAC does do some work on that. And we do think that everyone in the United States should have access to a healthy diet with dignity. And to see how that is playing out in communities across the country is just devastating to people. To see what is happening with programs being cut and families really struggling. To see just kind of this assault on the programs that support families, on education, just all the different places. I do think it's really important as the leader of an organization to give your staff some grace and to give them some space too. And that does get back to the whole thing of making sure that people are taking time off and making sure that people feel supported. But I don't think you can understate how challenging these times are and how impactful those challenges are on your staff.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And if your staff aren't feeling impacted, you might not have the staff, right? Because it goes back to you want the staff who feel really passionate about the mission. So,
Uh,
yeah, I think that's really important, that your staff are, they're like your number one fuel source for getting stuff done. Even with AI, it's still the people that are moving
right,
things forward.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Crystal. For those folks who want to support what you're doing or follow along with your leadership journey, what's the best way for them to get connected?
Yeah, well, so we do have a website, www.frac.org, which has all of our resources and everything else. And then I'm also on LinkedIn if people want to link into me. I'm always looking to connect with folks.
Excellent. And we'll have those links in the show notes. So thank you so much, Crystal, for joining us and everything you do. And thank you out there for tuning in and everything you do to make our communities better wherever you are. Please take a quick moment to like and review this podcast. It helps with the algorithm and boost it so other folks can get the information that is helpful to them. And until next time, I wish you all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.